All right. Hi, everyone. Let us situate ourselves by acknowledging the lands that we are on. I invite you to share in the chat or Q&A box where you are located and the names of the original inhabitants of that area. The Berkeley Public Library acknowledges that we sit on the unceded traditional lands of the Ohlone peoples. We honor with gratitude the land itself, as well as the Ohlone peoples who still live, work, and play in this region. The Berkeley Public Library condemns all forms of hatred, racism, and other forms of discrimination. We are outraged and saddened at the surge of hate crimes towards Asian American communities, as well as the racism that has been shown towards African American communities. We stand in solidarity with all marginalized peoples that have been subjected to hatred and intolerance and celebrate the differences that contribute to the strength of our community. Everyone is welcome here at the Berkeley Public Library. My name is Perlita Payne, and I'm a librarian at the Berkeley Public Library. It is my great honor to welcome you all to our program this afternoon, which is Toward an Anti-Racist Asian American Poetics. This event is generously funded by the Friends of the Berkeley Public Library and is co-sponsored by Eastwind Books of Berkeley. Please feel free to type your questions for our panelists into the Q&A box at any time. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by an extraordinary panel of Asian American poets who were gathered together by and will be in discussion with the brilliant MT Vallarta. MT Vallarta is a poet and PhD candidate in ethnic studies at the University of California, Riverside, and forthcoming Guarini Dean's pre to postdoctoral fellow in Asian American Studies at Dartmouth College. Their scholarship in poetry can be found in The Velvet Light Trap, Vice, The Bind, Nat Brute, Apogee Journal, and others. Please join me in welcoming MT Vallarta.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the amazing introduction, Perlita. So before I introduce our amazing poets, I'm going to go ahead and read the event description that all of you should have gotten when you signed up, just to further situate us some more. So according to scholar Dorothy Wong, quote, "Politics and aesthetic concerns are intimately intertwined," end quote. With white supremacist violence against Asians increasing under the COVID-19 pandemic, the call for artistic practices that are intertwined with politics, but also radically anti-racist, is louder than ever. Kazumi Chin, Muriel Leung, and Michelle Lin are three Asian American poets whose work reflects the contestation of racialized violence and the construction of futures beyond hierarchy and dominance. Thank you for joining us for this reading and conversation on what it means to curate an anti-racist Asian American poetics. So I have the pleasure of introducing Kazumi Chin. Kazumi Chin is the author of Having a Coke with Godzilla, and I have their amazing book right here from Sibling Rivalry Press 2017. They are a queer scholar, poet, educator, and game designer. They also co-produce the Kearney Street Workshop podcast, We Won't Move, a Living Archive. Secondly, we have Muriel Leung, Boat Books and Bone Confetti, winner of the 2015 Noemi Press Book Award. She is the poetry co-editor of Apogee Journal and co-hosts the Blood Jet Writing Hour podcast with Rachel Cruz and me. She is a member of Marissa Collective, a feminist speakers bureau, and Andrew W. Mellon Humanities in a Digital World Fellow. She is completing her PhD in creative writing and literature at the University of Southern California. And then last but certainly not least, we have Michelle Lin, who is a poet, mixed media artist, and author of A House Made of Water, also from Sibling Rivalry Press, published in 2017, She is the co-host and co-producer of We Won't Move, A Living Archive, a podcast from Kearney Street Workshop about Asian Pacific American arts at ASW Presents, a reading series for emerging APA writers in the Bay Area. So if you could join me in applauding our amazing readers who are here with us today, we're going to go ahead and start with Kazumi Chin. So whenever you're ready, Kazumi, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you right now.
Hi everybody, thank you, Auntie. So yeah, I think what I want to do, I think I want to first address what's going on in Palestine. So this Saturday marks the 23rd anniversary of the Nakba, which translates to the catastrophe. This was the 1948 Palestinian exodus and beginning of the Arab-Israeli War. On May 19th, 1948, 700,000 Palestinians were forced from their homes, villages, and land, and Israel passed legislation that would prevent Palestinians from returning. And so those who are their descendants would become refugees at this time. So I guess I think I want to start with a poem that I'm calling, let's see, where is it? Okay, well, theoretically I would if this document would work. I wrote a poem called, well, let's see, let's go to the lighter version of this. I've been obsessed with TikTok, and there's a genre of video on TikTok where these people are dancing to the song Heartbreak Anniversary, and it's really funny. Um, and I can't stop thinking about it. So I made a poem called Heartbreak Anniversary, May 14th, which is again the anniversary of the Intifada, of the Nakba. Okay, so Heartbreak Anniversary, May 14th, after Anna Blazevich. What's heartbreak? Oranges, olives, a stained tablecloth, poems about diaspora, my recurring dreams of cages and flight. Call it ancestry, dreams of oranges that split open, the flesh of them sweet on my tongue. Call it history, years of forgetting, beneath layers and layers of silencing, the meaninglessness of a colonized vocabulary, a country without sovereignty, a cliche, paradise. What's heartbreak? I tell my therapist, and she asks if this is about my culture. No and yes. Is a cage a culture? Just as much as the tiger inside, just as much as the paint they mix to cover it. Not the trauma in our bones, but the way we spit stones, I tell her, into mouths never meant to hold them. What's heartbreak? I call Chelsea and she says, what is there to do? It happens every year. The sun peels back scabs and Elon Musk plays Wario on TV. Heartbreak? I'm sorry. I don't have the endurance to be a poet, TM. I wish I could write the moon without hating myself. I wish I could just talk about my feelings or that part of a relationship where you don't know what limb goes where and you're scared to say the wrong thing. Okay, you know what? Fuck it. What's heartbreak? When I say I can't love you like they love you, that doesn't mean I don't. Um, so that is that one. And I guess I've just been really thinking about, I guess, my relation to Palestine a lot, honestly, because this was just what I wrote, a week ago. But um, back in, what was this? I'm sorry, my sense of time is all messed up in the pandemic. Sometime in the summer, I think I wrote this poem called "The War." And I'm gonna have these two lines in here. One of them is, "I will love who loves me. I will hate who hates me." Um, Time is a scam, um, and that's by not "Time is a Scam." I will love who loves me. I'll hate who hate me. That's by June Jordan. And then I'm gonna end with this Mahmoud Darwish. Um, She said, when will we meet? I said, a year after the war ends. She said, when will the war end? I said, when we meet. And so that'll be my moderation. I'm just pulling in these voices because they're really important to me. Um, and so this poem is called The War. I will make a ceremony of living. I will give myself to myself. When the ash falls from the sky, I will don a mask and drive deep into the heart of the city, her lights washing over my face. I will drive into a memory of orchards and streams, buried in my grandfather's voice, in the last letter he wrote me. I will love who loves me. I will hate who hates me. Let me show you something, he once told me, disappearing into the garage. 10 minutes later, he emerged with a small teal box in his hands. He put it down on the kitchen table. It was a while before he could open it. I want to tell this story in the way it must be told. I want you to know there was a war. And I want to make no apologies when I say the war is all I have ever known. The structure of the world is war. It must be to sustain the nation state. It must be to sustain the expropriation of land. It must be to repress those who seek non-war. Non-war is not peace, for peace exists within the framework of war. When we say abolish the police, it means abolish the war. When we say no history, no self, we mean no the war. How do I tell my story without the story of my ancestors? How do I tell the story of my ancestors without the story of war? War as event and structure, war as object and verb. Life is what emerges from war, despite war. But what is life? Poems about the moon, poems about shipwrecks and stars, poems about winding rivers and descending into the underworld. And what is the war? Poems about the moon, poems about shipwrecks and stars, poems about winding rivers and descending into the underworld. My grandfather opens the box. Inside, a small sheet of cotton. He tenderly sets it aside to reveal a small string of cowrie shells. During the war, I'd find them on the beach. For your report, you can write about that, but I still can't find the words. And when is the war? When I tell you after all of this is over, it is whenever you are. It is when I tell you I will see you soon, and then I do. When this war is over, a declarative buried in supposition, a desire buried in syntax, a dream of a home to return to. When this war is over, I will breathe for the first time. I will speak my own name and not be ashamed. She said, when will we meet? I said, a year after the war ends. She said, when will the war end? I said, when we meet. And again, the ending is from Mahmoud Darwish. Okay, so I was gonna read this one, but I'm just gonna read this actually because it's kind of sad. So here's a little bit of a funnier poem, I think. Um, okay, thank you for your support. But I don't want to cry, so I'm gonna read this funny poem. Um, okay, here. This doesn't have a title yet. But I'm gonna read it. Um, let's see. Me and my friend Anthony were gonna play this game called Bluebeard's Bride, where you like wander around a house, and like you play the different fragments of a woman's consciousness as she's about to be married to a sinister evil man. And so I was thinking about that, and I wrote this poem that then went far away from that original idea. But the devastation of the future is what I wrote to Anthony, trying to describe the feeling of wandering a house, lost in velvet draped rooms, candelabras, the trophied heads of majestic beasts protruding from the rafters, nothing more than furniture. At this point, my brain is so addled with performance studies, I want to write, we can read anything as furniture, as if we try hard enough. This wrist, furniture. This carpal tunnel, furniture. This pandemic, also furniture. Though who would buy a pandemic from IKEA? I'd rather shop for clothes in the women's aisle, pretending to call my mom, exclaiming to no one. No one cared, but it made me feel better to pretend. I belonged to some kind of picking order that didn't leave me for last. I was always picked first for kickball in elementary school. I was really fast, except Kyle Bunthawong, who eventually almost made it to the Olympics for gymnastics, was faster than me. So was it really my fault that I couldn't defeat a world-class athlete in the 3rd grade? I hope Kyle is doing well. I'm old enough now to know there are people who are not. I know this girl who died at 30, but the last thing I remember was I was at a concert with her when I was 16 and I had a crush on her, but now she's gone. I thought I was going to die, Karen told me after she got COVID-19. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. I forgot what it is to share a breath with someone else. It feels too intimate now after all this to breathe together. I don't want it. I don't know how to even sit next to someone else anymore without making it extremely weird. How do you even talk to people without the mediation of a screen and 1,000 miles between you? The concert we went to was Vanessa Carlton, and Vanessa groaned every time someone asked when she was going to play 1,000 miles. If a song could become a ghost and haunt you for the rest of your life, it would be 1,000 miles for Vanessa. Poor Vanessa. She never asked to be so popular. She just wanted to sing about unicorns in the dark of winter and be a weird horse girl for the rest of her life. I used to fantasize about being a horse girl, but it turns out I was mostly into the girl part and not the horse part. I don't actually like horses. They're too big, too scary, too liable to kick my ass. And I'm just not in a place to deal with that right now. It's a fucking pandemic. I'm not in a place to deal with anything, okay? I can't even wash the dishes. How do you expect me to converse with a horse or anything that doesn't fit into these little boxes stacked one on the other on my little laptop screen, my little face blinking back at me, mirroring my every awkward held tilt? I put a video on loop, pretending to be present, and fell asleep. I dreamt of a TikTok video where they cut into the hoof of a horse that hadn't been maintained for a while, and a little red spot where he'd become inflamed reached up and punctured me like a little punctum in my little tender heart. That looked so painful, I thought, but it turns out the horse was fine. They just cut through the hoof like it was made of cheese. That was when I knew I could never be a horse girl because the very thought of horses makes me queasy. The very thought of a little red spot glaring at me from the back of a hoof, I can't do it. Um, and by the way, tell me why I can't stop watching Heartbreak Anniversary dance videos. See, it comes up in all my posts. It fills the void, I told Angel, left in my heart by the pandemic. I want only to get boba with her when this is all over. But now there's a boba shortage. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? Can an Asian get a break? Can I have one moment to rest before something else racist happens? It's racist that I can't just go get boba whenever I want to. And before you call me a boba liberal, let me tell you about how it is possible to love boba and also revolution. How it is possible to imagine a future free of prisons that also contains boba. Um, how these things are not as incompatible as they might seem. I want to see the end of capitalism and also chew on my QQ textured tapioca balls while I watch it all burn. I mean, in Hong Kong, they made a flag with Thai and Taiwanese people and called it the Milk Tea Alliance, which goes to show you maybe it is possible for Asians to come through with their boba. I don't know. Anything is possible if we remember there is this endless horizon of possible tea options: queer tea, radical tea, the kind of tea you spill with your homies after a long day of Zoom and Zoom and Zoom, tea as a site of healing, tea as potential, boba as that ornamental excess that our revolutions might hinge upon, boba as the pleasurable mouthfeel of a post-capitalist world. Okay, that's it, my last poem. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you so much, Kazumi. That was amazing. I enjoyed your work. Thank you for those powerful pieces on just abolishing racial capitalism. But finally, I don't feel so alone in my fear of horses because I don't like them either. They are terrifying and scary. So I'm happy that I'm not alone in that. All right. So thank you again to Kazumi. And now we're going to transition to Muriel Leung. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you, Muriel, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much for that, Kazumi. It kind of reminds me of the recently I heard the term boba Asians. That I don't know who coined it, but I know that J. Caspian King had referred to it in jest. And I remember Kazumi had a tweet once. I was just like, what did Bobas ever do to you? And I was just like, can we pick something else to decry the kind of, you know, Asian American behavior that acts like in traitorous form. So yeah, I agree. Also, we may need to pick a new term, especially after the treaties, like in favor of boba and revolution from Kazumi. I really do think we need to find another object. Um, what did we end up picking after boba? We'll save that conversation for later. But thank you also to Kazumi too for also, um, you know, starting us off by referencing what's happening in the world right now, and especially in terms of solidarity of Palestine. And I'd like to echo a sentiment that Kazumi started by also sharing this June Jordan poem, The Intifada, Incantation, poem 38 for BBL by June Jordan. I said I loved you and I wanted genocide to stop. I said I loved you and I wanted affirmative action and reaction. I said I loved you and I wanted music out the windows. I said I loved you and I wanted nobody thirst and nobody cold. I said I loved you and I wanted justice under my nose. I said I loved you and I wanted boundaries to disappear. I wanted nobody roll back the trees. I wanted nobody take away daybreak. I wanted nobody freeze all the people on their knees. I wanted you. I wanted your kiss on the skin of my soul. And now you say you love me, and I stand despite the trillion treacheries of sand. You say you love me, and I hold the longing of the winter in my hand. You say you love me, and I commit to friction and the undertaking of the pearl. You say you love me. You say you love me. And I have begun, I believe, to believe maybe you do. I am tasting myself in the mouth of the sun. So that was in solidarity of Palestine, and I hope that we can continue to reflect on that, and I hope we can talk more about that too later in the Q&A section with MT, who I know raised the question of what does anti-racist work mean for Asian American writers, activists, and cultural workers. So I hope we can talk more about that soon. Also today, I wanted to read a little bit from my book, Imagine as a Swarm, which comes out May 25th, but it's kind of already out, not really sure. But it's a series of essays in verse, and I wanted to read, wanted to read one long essay in verse, and then I wanted to read a couple of pieces from the back. And I'll say more about that in just a little bit, but this is called A Careful List of All My Failures. Every year, the same ritual of having myself before each benevolent ghost. Gold fleck paper lit until its inevitable blossoming. Moth, angel, ash, bead. I am reminded sometimes the floundering can be gentle while also singed. Here, my body tilts forward in an eternal rocking. There, I carried incense too far to the south of me. The wind blew the fire out. With such mournfulness I was talking, I sang it deep into my bones, and clumsily the talking became a fugue, cowed for you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and I was tall as a carousel bush, wanting always to please. But my badness seeks unfilial pleasure, discovered too early how to sift through my own self-loathing. But my body did not bow, it bent. My mother calls it a bettering, as in, do you think you're better than me? Because being bad has a texture like the rubbing together of two unlike stones. Its spark means plenitude. It has no exact translation. But I swallowed my words for 6 years until they were as rotten as me. So she planted a sword in herself, and I took the sword and sunk it down my grotto. In such variable tricks we survived for years. My bad made of dirt, glitter, and so much float. How American this language of ascension that I could spit back I did not ask to be born, and mean it. Clara Jean Kim calls it the field of racial positions, the arrangement of different bodies along a dying field, vying for the one blade of fresh-cut grass, as if none of us are fit for water. What the theory of racial triangulation tells us is the distribution of inequities rooted in white dominance, that I could look to you and feel that I am at once lesser and perhaps fortuitous for having earned that small morsel of God. To bend so far back, my spine becomes another flag of assimilable colors, and I am not even legible to myself, cannot even English my way out. At my eradication, my first love wrote me a poem about my body, telling me what my body was when knuckle creased, how I knew it was a trap but could not gather my flesh fast enough. Those were the heaviest days, when I was filled with so much rain and did not know what he meant when he said, "You are the prettiest, my pretty, my pretty. Can you speak Japanese to me? Can you pretty, please?" And I was so grateful to be even considered while dissolving beneath him that I shuddered away the alarm and said, "That is not me," but also, okay. Some days it is so quiet, it feels like begging. One day smaller than a fingernail, another day the colossal fury of a rising tide. In a nation of proximity and degree, what is my likeness to a thumb? The brutal texture of my race beside another. The history of my particulars, only a fraction of a tower. How luminous my non-speech, how my ghost becomes a hiss. The resistance lives in me, I know, though how? A history racing against the self knows only meaning the monument, the isolation of grief in a great alone. The way my therapist traced it, the trauma wheel in perpetuity moves and comes upon a wall, smacking against its bright white surface, often on an unsuspecting day in succession, until it begins to feel like a drowning. On paper, the faces of my ancestors bear the mark of trying, as in the act of striving would do the body good. The bones buck up, refuse to lose. The white women who said, "I'm jealous of your culture, you will never run out of things to talk about." The poorest matter of one's racial suffering. Such myths we prepare for ourselves, in a singular language, a cleansing. That absence can feel like relief. Still, to my mother, I described how I wanted to live a good life of many candied gratitudes. I wanted to be bigger than a bruise. So much noise I patterned my breaking. But my queer self buckling against the frame is something other. When R folded the sheet over me, the city was quiet and borderless. I dreamed. Even locked within the room, I poured out of it. Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samarasinha says, "Where is this place our baby bodies sprinted towards, even when we were holding still for as long as possible? In other words, what does it mean to be free? The sky of my love is full of tumult. That I know." In a dying field, pointing to my own body, I saw that it was mine, was always there, and it spoke when I spoke, a language of two hardened places, and there I lived, despite it all. And then just wanted to read one last poem from the final section of the book. The final section is called "When I Imagine All the Possibilities of the Swarm," and all of the poems in the final section begin with the word "suppose." And so this is the last suppose poem in the book. Suppose there is an end to our suffering. Like a chariot, the absence of grief circles us with the obstinate heat of the largest star. To believe in the radiant orbit of this fire, to face an empty cup and find the constellated mire of you and me in the toppling of a century. We rise from the painful corridors of a life. Rarely did we dream of planetary rings, and yet, tilting ourselves up, we see the heavenly bodies of all that has passed, each one bright with surrender. We can go on. We can dress ourselves in the celestial cloak of this wide expanse, every woman and femme in a disorder of appeal. I will never write another elegy again. I am looking at you now in the acceleration of time. All the possibilities of the swarm ignite, the humming of many wings amassing into a greater noise. We can write our origins sacred here and renounce the country of our fear. There is only our singular pulse when we fill the sky. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Muriel. That was beautiful. I dropped a link in the chat box for folks if they're interested in purchasing Imagine Us the Swarm. So I just dropped the link again. My book already shipped, so I know it says pre-order, but I think it'll probably ship your way a lot sooner than what it says. So yay, you don't have to wait long. But yeah, thank you so much to Muriel, and I'm so excited to pass it on to Michelle Lin. I'm gonna go ahead and spotlight you. So whenever you're ready.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's gosh, so I'm still like reeling from the poems. Thank you for sharing space with all of us. I'm excited to talk later too. I feel like there's been a lot of June Jordan coming up for all of us. Funnily enough, when I was thinking about the questions you posed to us, MT, there was that same poem from June Jordan that Kazumi mentioned in their part of the reading. And I'm just gonna read the full thing because it's kind of short, but now that Muriel has also read something from June Jordan, I'm like, this feels right. So this is resolution 1003 by June Jordan. I will love who loves me. I will love as much as I am loved. I will hate who hates me. I will feel nothing for everyone oblivious to me. I will stay indifferent to indifference. I will live hostile to hostility. I will make myself a passionate and eager lover. In response to passionate and eager love, I will be nobody's fool. Okay, so I am going to read a few poems. All right. No, it's me, I say to my mother, my father, my sisters, brother, all about me, what you do, or your wrongs as I call you back, because this is what you've made after you've made me your bridge, your eldest, your ship, night terror and teacher, substitute tongue, talisman of air between your hand and the stranger's. How deftly I play this game of telephone now, like a second mouth, like O as in Owens, as if everything you do is my arm of my arm, my cry as my cry. No, it's me. I forget that you're human with dreams apart from me. After all, these are just years of leaning into night. I failed to write the poem, and tonight I learned to love you better. I've lain in the dirt and known this bed was not mine, and still turned to those beside me. Astonishing to cleave our mouths as rusted spoons and still kiss, but now and then a pause, the blood brown utensil in hand, and I am looking at the curled down doll of my cheek that have curved my sleeping body down beside, as the lonely sort of comfort my parents both relied on. What are we eating? What remains between teeth builds through cavity, each pit my body lies in to be named for someone else's survival. America, I thought we didn't need you. The thirsty dahlia, we refused rose water, mouth left on the table between us in a room we did not enter. I'd pressed myself to the dirt and sang quietly to only those I loved. America, you light candles and bracken our structures down. America, we learn to breathe in the fire, and the next, and the next, and the next. America, I thought rage would be enough to sustain us. I thought wonder at those who stretched themselves across the sand and refused this name and that. Those who named themselves when you named them dead was what we'd anoint newest sun with. But again, you trigger another wick behind your back. I have lifted my head above the tracks and looked at the train. I've made music with a spoon and had no words to sing. I have a crushed hollow stem, a table felled on one leg, the survival of some while others don't. America, Ma peels pears of rock sugar and one slice of ginger for the cold, and the table will be there when I go home next, and I will find it with a light, and I'll sit one more time looking until I blow it out. There is a faraway storm. There is a humming between my teeth. I let them sing dangerously against your neck. The year of the horse is dead. Oh, horses. They're dead. Some of us are glad. I'm just kidding. Okay, the year of the horse is dead. And so is a year of breaking and brokenness. This beach and you upon my back, wielding your heaviest sword. I rear back to a line of jet-haired women before me, unstabled, so never yours, on knocked knees named Pinna, pinned apart for discovery. The sides of sea you see breaching there is a dark opening endlessly on itself. Like so, I hooved my soul to stand on stones, and then I furled the dread tale in daylight, and the tale by next dawn. Bit down the bit you gave me, melted me to the point of weapon, drew the dagger down my own throat. And then I spit the jewel back to you to wear, yes, they will point to your own pale throat. Yes, there was the bride unbridled in the mouth, but first I felt the clang of English and then I bit down. Okay. All right. So this is a newer one. I've been like going through a dry spell. So uh hang on, I want to pull up the chat. What's going on in here? Where's that snap emoji? Oh, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. At every point in my life, I was valid, is this next one. Animals don't make assumptions, is an assumption I will make. Don't judge me. I just want to live my life. I can believe anything now, knowing a tarantula can go 2 years without food, a fact announced by scientists when after 2 years, 9 months, and 19 days, their test subject succumbed shortly after. I believe I can go another 15 or 7 without sharing about what happened to me. I offer instead the day before yesterday, when the concerned white couple entered our yard to ask my uncle gardening why he was working on Labor Day. I can't help but assume the worst of white people, but a lion makes a kill less than 20 times a year, which says something about failure or choosing your fights carefully. I am choosing this poem carefully when I say this time 3 out of the 4 men who have hurt me have been men of color you know. I am asking that you listen without assuming I haven't already done all I can to not break our community. At 14, 19, 3, my boyfriend, father, beloved poet, in the upstairs, in the car, during office hours, made me, but did not touch me, was concerned, said no one would ever understand me again. Yes, I wished I wasn't such a hateful person too, that everything handed to me wasn't already tied to a stick that was once used to beat somebody else. Just once, give it up for the lesser poet who chose instead to stay in, go dancing, actually do her eyebrows today. Today, I took X number of selfies, declined X invitations to the well-known event on account of X poet being there. I give it up, that one line about cows and dreaming, but I've already given it to a friend who I knew would love it more. Give it up for me, for I am still capable of giving and giving up. I'd assumed as a young girl I didn't understand loving the whole person, but I now know I've never loved a person more wholly. Some water deer, hours after birth, could sleep in the center of a palm. My partner of now 10 years, despite our failures of loving, would probably hold me again in my ugliest of episodes should they return. I offer this in hopes you know what surviving is, what it could be when we let ourselves go. Okay, I have 2 more poems. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Sacrifice. Most days I forget the moon exists and how half my dresses are borrowed from my aunties with their overbuying and overtalking and forgetting everything else. Most days I forget I am small, and the last bites I leave on my plate, just in case, and a lipstick smudged on the inside of my collar each time I take off my clothes. In old KTVs, that's proof that a spouse is cheating on you. But here I am, having an affair with myself when I take care of everyone else before I take care of myself. I forget that hope is the scariest thing. I forget I am capable, arm's length from a many-legged thing, railing it to die. I forget my own buggy existence, how I leave incandescent cells here there. I forget dour fish cheeks at silent dinner tables and how this was not the face I had wanted. I forget my grandfather's last autumn of old spoons, the desert its rust made of my hands, and the overturned possum and the metropolis of maggots beneath. I forget there is more life in decay. Last summer, last year, we mapped joy in a dying bee's brain, how their wiggle dance was akin to ours. Forget foolish proofs for life. I packed the last box into the last truck. I undress and kiss the inside of everything they have given me. Oh my God, MT, shout out to the auntie that gives you like the stuff, like their old stuff, but also like stuff that they bought and never wore. I swear like everything I own is from my aunties. All right, so this is my last poem. Some of you might have heard this before, but I wrote this thinking a lot about friends that I really love that are also included in this room with me. So I always kind of bring this to the to the reading. This is "The tongue is not a metaphor, it is what I kiss you with." The touch of your lipstick on the napkin left on the table blushes a country of your own making, and I have never been more in love. Untrue. I am in love harsher each time I fall apart, which is the most Scorpio thing I've ever written, and I don't even know shit about astrology, which is untrue actually. I do know more now since I wrote this poem. And I don't even know shit about astrology. I just like to make fun of myself and my ridiculous ideas, like this one: an entire country founded on kissing. Is it so impossible to imagine a making founded on tenderness? What could it look like if each time fallout glitter on our love's collar, brilliance in new nation, and tongues, so many tongues rested in anthem? Well, I don't believe in nations, but I do believe in tongues. How yours match your lipstick and the kisses you leave behind on the banquet turntable napkin after good spicy soup. I don't believe in anything being found unless it's us rounding the corner and being startled by ourselves in some window and how low our shoulders look at peace together. The stars tell us, I don't know, I can't read stars or signs, but I do read your poems. So I know when I say that all my life, my body has felt like a just scabbed rupture, one that's not even mine, that you'd know what I mean. My mother would pinch my belly hard, and when pushed away, bear down harder to say, I made this body, it is mine. My mother was the first to teach me to leave myself, to have no ownership. My mother prepared me. Find myself? I don't know her. Make myself? As long as you're with me. Thank you so much.
Yay! Thank you so much to our lovely readers. That was such a beautiful way to end it, with love and kisses and lipstick. Thank you so much, Michelle. All right, so we are now going to transition to the Q&A. I have prepared 3 questions in advance for our panelists to answer, but we are also taking questions from you, our lovely audience. So please feel free to drop a question into the Q&A box. But I'm gonna go ahead and read our first question, which is, what does anti-racist work look like to you? How can Asian American writers, poets, and artists engage further with this type of work? How is anti-racism a part of your craft and writing process? So whoever wants to start, I'm also gonna copy and paste the question into the chat box.
I can start. For so in one of my in one of the things I read today, I cited Claire Jean Kim, who discussed the theory of racial triangulation. I think it's really interesting. Recently, it's come up again, and there's been a lot of, I think, like misreading of her work to mean that racial triangulation means that a Asian American struggle is like likened to Black struggle, and I think that's something that we need to like make a careful distinction about. I think anti-racist work specifically for Asian Americans, as well as like Asian American writers, artists, those of us who do work in arts and culture, is this recognition that even among Asian Americans, there's so much complexity across like immigrant experiences, refugee experiences, East Asians having a different, like a historical trajectory of place and privilege and also struggle in the U.S. Like that's totally distinct from Southeast Asian communities, and I think sometimes we have that struggle in like managing the complexity while also acknowledging that we are existing within a really complex racial framework in the US that is like perpetuates anti-Blackness within the US, but also globally. Um, like as the US is a force that is involved in multiple like militaristic engagements like across the world. It's I think it is about, for me, like being able to hold that complexity while also being vigilant about how we challenge those things in which like part of who we are involves like very legitimate struggle, but also the ways in which like we can be complicit in oppression as well. And I think that's the struggle moving forward, is like what privileges can you acknowledge you possess, while also being highly aware that like your struggles also matter too, and not to operate from a place of guilt, but just like um, I think of like I use the term allegiance a lot, just like who are you in allegiance with? Who do you act in affinity with? And it has to always be the voices of people who are more marginalized than you, or who are more vulnerable. And I think part of anti-racist work is always asking yourself that question over and over again.
Yeah, I thank you, Mira, for that. I check plus on everything. And also I really love how you ended it with like you always have to be asking yourself questions. I feel like for me, part of the work of anti-racism, like specifically in like poetry and in art, is I never feel like I have the answers or I've got it down. You know, like there's always more I need to learn. There's always more I have to question and think about, and to my relationship to everything with also the different privileges I have myself. And I think also to add some of the things I was thinking about personally, anti-racist work is like work and like something that moves conversation or action beyond questions. For me, this is what's really important. It's like personal things, like beyond questions of representation and inclusion in inherently oppressive systems. And so I know that like there's a lot of like work around like making us visible, making people feel represented. And that is very important work. And at the same time, we need to think about like, well, what exactly that we want to be a part of? Is it part of white supremacy? Because I refuse that, you know? So that's something to think about. I think about all the time in my work. Like, I don't want a seat at the table if the table's still anti-Black and anti-brown, anti-trans, you know, anti-disabled folks. Like, I don't want that. And so on the other end of that, I think a lot about, and this is something that my work is now more attuned to, is like, well, what am I thinking about instead? I do a lot of work through Kearney Street Workshop, which is this Asian Pacific American arts nonprofit in San Francisco. And we have this saying, we have it on these little buttons, to imagine is to resist. And I think a lot about how quite literally, poetry and art has that power to literally render worlds that we want to live in, that we say do exist because we're writing it into existence right now, and how this work has brought us together in conversation around this, to work together around this. I mean, literally everybody in this, like my fellow panelists, like we met each other through writing, and that itself is like amazing itself, the power of it itself. Like, so I think I'll stop there for a little bit. I feel like I could talk about this forever, so I want Kazumi to have a chance too.
Yeah, thank you, both of you. I think I have another poem. I have a couple lines, and I think this will help. Where I wrote this thing for my grandpa. I said, who has passed. I said, I give you freedom from the world that held you in so many cages. I give you movement and the ability to work for no one but yourself. I give you sunlight in your skin without fear of it burning. Fairfield nights sipping tea on your porch. Because like I think that's it. Is like what is the war? As I was like writing in my other poem, like what is oppression? Right. It's the inability for folks to have a particular kind of life. Ruth Gilmore calls it, you know, being made vulnerable to premature death. That's what racism is for her, and the exploitation that comes with that. And I think that's always my concern when I write is like, how do we do the work of getting people closer to a world where they are not exposed to premature death and are not exploited? And so I'm like, okay, well, you know, in a lot of ways we believe in reincarnation in my family. And I was thinking about, okay, when my grandpa comes back, what is the world that I would want him to return to? And so these lines about like, I want freedom, but what is freedom, right? Freedom, I think for a lot of us growing up in Asian American families, the way that we've been told freedom exists is often within the structure of capitalism and not outside of it. But I think we're all at a point now where a lot of us, you know, we're really envisioning freedom from capitalism rather than freedom within it. And that's like, I think something that our ancestors give us the ability to do, right? Like, I don't know, like when I reframe it that way, when I say, oh, like we have the capacity to imagine a world for our families when because they were able to, you know, imagine a family for us, like that means something to me. That's to me the anti-racist work, and often a lot of where the tensions that I feel in our community come from, right? And so to me, it's a lot about harnessing that really hopeful view, knowing still that like everything is war. But I think there is something to be said about holding freedom as the goal, holding movement, having the ability to work for yourself as the goal. And as long as you're holding that, I feel like that's anti-racist work, you know, like something about that to me is at the heart of what I do. So yeah.
Thank you, Kazumi. So the term that they mentioned is premature death. If folks want to learn more about it, I highly recommend checking out Ruth Wilson Gilmore's Golden Gulag and Lisa Marie Cacho's Social Death. And I want to read, you know, I think Kazumi, you're referring to Ruthie's definition of racism, which is from Golden Gulag, in which she states, racism specifically is the state sanctioned or extra legal production and exploitation of group differentiated vulnerability to premature death. So thank you for framing racism and white supremacy as this ongoing exposure of Black, Indigenous, people of color to premature death, and how anti-racist work is the need to be able to create life where people can live more freely and fruitfully and fully. So I am going ahead and transition us to the next question. I'm also gonna copy and paste it in the chat box. So queerness is a motif that threads together all of your work, whether it's pursuing gender nonconforming expression, same-sex love, or challenging biological kinship structures. Why is embracing queerness also a part of anti-racist work? What does a queer of color poetics entail for you?
I recently wrote this essay about my ex, where it's it's about like, you know, an obsession or infatuation, and thinking about how like, you know, if queerness is about, you know, like spilling in excess, right? Like things that are too much. Um, and Asian Americanness is typically like conflated with like unfeeling or lack of sentimentality, like robotic, you know, like the ability to hold so much pain with composure and stoicism. Um, it's like when you put those two things side by side, it just like it doesn't fit in public imagination. But I know that for a lot of like queer Asian American friends and myself, like those are the contradictions that we contend with like every day. And it's like even if we know our own experiences are so different, it can feel so injurious to not have that reflected back in this sort of public light. And so I think of it in as sort of anti-racist work in the sense of like this is like an articulation of herself and our being in this world. It is contesting this fact that like in a world in which like we shouldn't exist, right? If like to be too much and at once and feeling at the same time, like that is a contradiction that shouldn't exist, and yet we do. So the fact that we exist says something, right? And I think that that is already a really radical act in itself, in the ways in which we articulate through our work, through our art, through our cultural expression, is is just a very powerful gesture. And I think in allowing the complexity of those experiences to showcase itself, like I think even just like to be able to have queer Asian American art that's not alike and that like has also like disagreement, it can coexist in disagreement, and for that disagreement to be legible, like that itself is like what we should be striving for. And sometimes it can be really hard because I think mainstream public discourse is that like queer Asian Americanness is still really illegible. So I think about the ways in which like can we exist as we are and have these conversations among us, like and not worry so much about like can we become like powerful enough that we don't even have to worry about whiteness, you know, or um, and thinking about like that judgment for us, like what if the work is something that we can do among ourselves and with other people of color, who's experienced different challenges with affect within their fight for racial justice, um, and against like transphobia and homophobia. So I think about that a lot, um, and I can't believe all of that came from writing about my ex, but that is also a very queer Asian American thing to do.
So for me, the like constructs of race like is so intertwined with like gender identity and sexuality that it's actually kind of hard for me to think about these things separately. I think I want to shout out I took this really amazing course in race and visual studies with Professor Autumn Womack, who was at University of Pittsburgh at the time, but we looked at the history of photography in particular. And through that, the construction of Blackness, race, but then quickly became clear. I mean, I was really young then and I didn't know a lot. It quickly became clear looking at this that like the construction of race and gender sexuality was just like, wow, like it's actually all is happening at the same time together. And so I think about it like, so when you asked that question, I was like, well, what do I actually think about this specifically queerness? For me, I think to be queer, and also like when we say like to queer something, is to transgress systems and structures. So like I think of it as like rule breaking, when rules are against people's lives, and wanting to just simply exist. And on the flip side, if like queerness for me is that, then like it also becomes a site of like a lot of potential. So if we actually realize that we exist outside of binaries, we also exist then outside of borders and outside of walls. And then we can begin to name for ourselves like, well, then how do we exist actually? Or like, how do we want to exist? Like, and how do we want to do that together? So that's like another thing I was thinking about. And then literally, I feel like I can't think about liberation work or my art without like the teachings and actions of like many Black and brown trans activists, right? So it's like, I don't know, it's all kind of like together for me.
I think something that, like I said, I'm obsessed with TikTok. And so I was watching a TikTok video about this girl who she come on and she's like, have you ever seen an Asian lesbian on TV? They got like Asian bisexuals and they got Asian gays, but what are the Asian lesbians? And they thought about it, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know any. It's hard, right? And I think that's what Muriel, you're talking to too, right? Like we can see how it manifests in particular ways. Just like, people can't imagine a certain kind of existence. But I think like in my poem, I was talking about like I used to think I wanted to be a horse girl, but what I liked was girls, not being a girl, not horses. And like that was important to understand, right? Because I think when you think about queer desire, it's very messy. Like you don't really understand it. It's hard to. It's not codified. You can't codify it within a particular way because it's like so queer, And so like realizing the horses are not the big part, right? It's kind of it's a joke. It's not that real, but it's a funny poem. But the energy behind it, that's the point, right? The energy of like, here is a condensed, like a whole bunch of signifiers that condense on top of each other to the point that you don't know what the hell is going on. And queer desire just hits those condensed signifiers. You don't know like how is this going to unfurl? Like what is actually happening until you just follow through on the desire and you push through it and you do the work to understand yourself in relation to the world and to people and to your own desires and gender and sexuality and everything, right? And it's not an accident then that a lot of queer folks are really good at thinking through race, because that's also the work you have to do to think through race and to be anti-racist. You have to understand how packed in the way that race condenses on people is, right? Like you have to be able to unpack all the things that are happening. And that queer analytic is super helpful when you go to race, knowing, like everyone was talking about earlier, that you can never actually differentiate race and sexuality and gender from one another. Like they're all, again, this like dense cluster of signifiers that are imaginably like linked in a very strong way, both in terms of the present and also in terms of our history. Like what should I call it? The first Exclusion Act was against Asian women, right? Like it was a gendered act, right? You can never differentiate these things; they're always tied together. So, I think queerness really helps us see that.
Thank you, Kazumi. So my last question for the panelists, and a reminder to our audience to please submit questions through the Q&A box. We'd love to also good dialogue with your own insights. But my last question is who, especially since we began this event by reading June Jordan, who are your current influences? Why is building a genealogy of writers, artists, activists, and workers who have come before and are currently present part of exercising anti-racism? What lessons can we learn from past generations about activism and resistance?
Yeah, I can go first this time. So one of the things that's been super helpful for me, um, so I've been working with my student Reina who's here, and I'm super happy to see Reina. Hi. But like this work of trying to imagine a different way of being in community and like a different kind of, I don't know, like work practice, like that's what's influencing me is like we're writing together, I guess, and that's been super useful. Two of these poems came out of me just writing with Reina, and we've just been talking about poetry, and it's been so nice, like just to like be doing this work. Like I want to be a teacher, I want to be part of a community where I can like provide something. But then it's like through that, like that's how I then become inspired. And so I think a lot of it, for me is about that. Like somehow, it's like I'll go into like the past in a second, but like somehow thinking about the future and the present in order to touch on that past is like that's the point, right? Like I go to the past in order to build to the future and to build in the present and just create community, and like that's how these poems even came to existence. Like I haven't been writing, like I literally haven't, but then working with other people on writing then becomes the thing, um, that activates all of it, right? So the influences, though, I really want to point folks to Native American studies. Um, this has been the place that I've been going to in order to really reconfigure my relationship to the land and to think through settler colonialism. I don't think settler colonialism itself as a thing to study is enough. I think you need to go to Native people's ideologies, Native people's ways of being, in order to actually critique settler colonialism. And the person that I've been going to a lot has been Mishwana Goldman, and I don't know, it can be a hard text to read, but all of her work has been so central for me in rethinking what it means for me to live in the Bay Area, especially. Um, and I think someone who demonstrates this work really well is Irina Alejo, who is an artist that we've been working with. Me and Michelle both been working with a lot. Irina's work is just so dope, and I would urge everyone to check it out too, because again, I think their work is so tied to a more thorough understanding of what it means to be in relation to geography and land in the Bay Area. And I think when we are able to see this relationship, when we are to feel this relationship that folks are providing for us, we start to you can do the activism better. You can understand settler colonialism as a feeling. You can understand your own relation to the land as a feeling. And then that feeling translates into your art and into your poems and into your activism. So that to me is really key right now.
I can go next. Reversing it. I'm dropping some links into the chat. So literally these were the people that came to mind when I looked at like what's been sitting with me right now. I also named Irina Kazumi because yes, we've been working with them together. But Irina Cialejo and Malaya Tuye actually are both looking at everybody. Monica Sook is also based in the Bay now, but essentially all these poets slash or Irina is a multidisciplinary artist. And Malaya Tuye is also a multidisciplinary artist now that I think about it. Their work is just really, I don't know. You should just look at it. Please look at it. Look at their work, all of them. Um, Not only is their work amazing and kind of essentially, I'm like lost for words right now. Sorry, my brain went bloop. But it's also the ways in which they work with community and their activism that really, really inspires me. And so I think about them all the time, and I'm just always wowed by not just their art, but the way they hold space with people and build space with people. So there's that. I dropped the link to the June Jordan poem again because that was also what was sitting with me. And also like Monica Sook is someone who showed me that poem first. And I'm like, oh God. And Monica's work is always blah, so good. And I put FK Twigs because I was actually recently talking about FK Twigs to my friend Moss, who's also here in the chat too, about how she's just an amazing multidisciplinary artist all around. And so like if you haven't seen her, just like even her music videos, I got a chance to see her perform live. It is just like super amazing. So I think about that a lot, especially now. Like I haven't been writing a lot of new poems, but I've been thinking a lot about other ways in which I can create. And so doing stuff like mixed media, that thing over there is one that I created more recently. Like I'm just playing with different forms. And then also thinking about body stuff too. Like I was trying to do dance for a little bit. So uh, I think for me right now, I'm in a space where I'm just like thinking of things in addition to words or beyond words. Um, and one other thing I wanted to mention was, so we've said a few times, like Kazumi and I, and also with our friend and arts curator Dara Del Rosario, started a podcast to Corner Street Workshop. We will move a living archive, and I felt like your question, MT, was actually like a major question of the podcast and like the impetus of like creating it. We wanted a thing where we can talk about arts activism with a focus on Asian Pacific American artists, but like we wanted to be intergenerational, and so like one part of about your question in terms of like the lessons we can learn from past generations about activism and resistance. There's something that from episode 2, I think with historian scholar Stella Habal, there's like she says something during our conversation that sits with me, still sits with me, which is in terms of organizing and movement. She said it's the same fight but different capital, and she was talking specifically around organizing for the International Hotel back in the 70s, and then like the fight for housing rights and the ongoing gentrification and push out that's happening, continues to happen in San Francisco, and how it's literally like the same fight and movements that continue, and the movements are extensions of each other, but the ways in which it's different is like back then for her it was like the banks, and now it's a lot of tech. So it's like thinking about that, and I think a lot of what we can learn from is like it, like in what ways are these the same and what have they shifted. So there's a lot, and when we are just in conversation with our elders, so that's something I've been thinking about. And I feel like there was something else I wanted to say. It'll come back. I'll stop now.
This is like a really incredible list. I have to remember to save this chat after so I can revisit it. I to just like restate, like, you know, MT had mentioned, like, you know, June Jordan was like a common influence. I just wanted to reiterate that, yeah, she has been really important. She was the first non-white, openly bisexual poet that I've ever read or known of. And it so happens that her politics and her poetry were just like exactly what I was looking for at the time in which I started writing. And so it was amazing to see someone who was writing about what were love poems that were also political poems too. And I didn't know that those two things could coexist at the same time. But it did produce an opportunity for me to sort of see the world of poetry and art making really differently. And it's no coincidence that a lot of like my like influences past and current are like have been like Black women. And I do think that we do a lot too. Black women in scholarship and then also in activism for a lot of the resources and conversations that we have today. So you just even think about like, you know, I think a lot of my political consciousness building was even just like from reading like Asada Shakur's autobiography, you know, in high school and college, and those have created a really profound impact for me too. And even just, I don't know, I continue to learn. I'm so thankful. You know, I mentioned or I cite Leah Lakshmi P.F. Samar Sinha, who was, you know, the like hearing her work in college, you know, a woman of color who talked about intersectionality, about disability, and about trauma in this way in which like everything is webbed and like exists in performance and is bodied, like that has and just her continued like organizing work has really been so profound. Dear friend Kay Ulande Barrett, trans Filipinx, disabled poet who is just like really extraordinary and just like like uh, through our friendship and also through like shared art making has like really taught me so much about how not just like to create the art object itself, but to cultivate the space around it and thinking about accessibility, thinking about how do you do more than just accessibility, but like move towards disability justice, and to do that with the consciousness about race and intersections of other identities. I think there's so much that friendships have taught me, even just like everyone here today, like among the panelists, like MT's like scholarship and creative writing, like has been just so like deeply impactful for me as a scholar, and just to be able to see someone who is like constantly has to challenge like traditional like scholarship models, which say that creative writing or actually having poetry in your work is not something that's like legible to traditional scholars. But the fact that MT is like forging this ground is like so significant, especially for Filipinx poetics and the like really difficult conversations that they are bringing to the table. And you know, I think that's like Kazumi's work is so important because I think like, you know, Kazumi like took jokes about like, you know, these funny poems, but I think in the humor has like just is able to like, you know, like create like pop like culturally relevant conversations that are happening in the now and are happening so fast, but to offer like really politically incisive critique, um that just like reminds me that like wow, like Kazumi's brain moves really fast, but also it's like it's so fun, and it's like, and there's lightness, but there's also and levity, but there's also something that is like deeply engaged with what's happening in the now. And Michelle's like bravery of her work and like just their ability to plumb the depths plumb the depths of just like emotional experience, to be able to point to things that are really hard and point to intergenerational injury and trauma, and to be able to come out of it with such thoughtfulness and compassion and love for community, um, in their work. And I think that comes with so much mindfulness and thoughts and consideration. And these are all about, and I say all these things, you know, like out of deep love for all of them, but also like I see these things emerging in their activism, their organizing, and their writing, and those activities are very intertwined. And so I don't think I like want to like need to say anything more. I mean, there's so many resources to list out there, but I also just would love to highlight, you know, the podcast that Michelle and Kasumi are working on, the Kearney Street Workshop, and because there have been episodes up already that explores Bay Area artists of color experiences, and I think that that's something definitely to check out. So I hope that you all do give it a listen.
Thank you, Muriel. So we do have time for one more question from an audience member. So Michael asks, what brings you joy? What little things of dailiness help you survive? Great question.
And Kazumi is just says TikTok. Oh wait, I'm spotlighted now. Okay, okay, I'll go first. But yeah, Kazumi's like TikTok. I live with Kazumi, so there like occasionally there's just the soundtrack to our lives is the sound of TikTok emanating from somewhere in our space, and Kazumi just like to themselves somewhere. um, so mine might be a little random. During the pandemic, I started Twitch streaming. So I was Twitch streaming art in the beginning, and then it quickly just became I just want to play video games. But something that really beautiful came out of that was I met a lot of really, really, truly amazing queer and trans gamers of color. Some of them are in the chat right now, and it's been so healing to just stream and play games together and just like have really silly fun, but also be really real about stuff. Like we do mental health check-ins, we like, so it's just like this was my first time doing something in years and years and years that wasn't directly related to like my art career, you know, like, and I had like I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this, I just feel called to do this. Maybe it's because of like the isolation, you know, during the pandemic. I'm like, I just really need to connect with people. So yeah, it's just literally, quite literally, I play video games with like queer and trans like friends, and we just have a really good time, and we like take care of each other. Um, yeah, that's my thing.
I love milkshakes. I feel like that's it. I was drinking one like right now. My friend Tiana and I have this thing where anytime, you know, we missed each other, we like thought the other person was having a bad day, we would just Venmo each other money for a milkshake. Um, and so it's something that like we did before the pandemic, and that is um, going to it still continues. Vicky says that Vita's gonna be salty that I didn't mention her. First of all, Vita's my cat, super annoying. If anyone wants her, please have her. Um, and she's hiding right now because Ziggy, the dog, is on the bed, and the two of them have trouble sharing space together. So she's a little mad right now. So she's already salty. Um, yeah, I've been, I play a lot of really stressful games on my phone. I don't even know if it gives me joy. It just like gives me a weird sense of accomplishment that like dissipates after 2 weeks. Like Animal Hot Springs, Hello Kitty Cafe. Um, I couldn't play Nico Asumi because it wasn't competitive enough. There was like no point to it. So that really quickly dissipated. Um, and so I think the only thing consistent thing is my milkshake, and occasionally my cat.
I hold on. Let me drop a link. I make role playing games. That's how I procrastinate on my qualifying exams and other things I meant to do in grad school. Um, Here it is. There. Okay. And also if you like games, you can talk to me like role playing games. You know, like we do like Dungeons and Dragons and also other things. So that's how I de-stress a lot. And then go on TikTok.
All right, we are going to have to transition to our closing now. Thank you so much. All right, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to MT Vallarta, Kazumi Chin, Muriel Leung, and Michelle Lin. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Please visit berkeleypubliclibrary.org to find other programs and events. I'm going to turn it over back to MT, who will also do closing.
Hi everyone. So like Perlita, I want to thank Perlita and the Berkeley Public Library for hosting this event, as well as Eastern Books of Berkeley for co-sponsoring. I would also like to thank you, our amazing attendees, for bearing witness to our words and for listening to our responses to these questions, and also for asking questions and for your comments as well in the chat. Thank you to the readers for your transformative work and for demonstrating the urgency of curating an anti-racist Asian American poetics. As anti-Asian hate continues to rise around the globe amidst routinized state violence against Black lives and the ongoing occupation of Palestine by US-backed settler colonialist Israel, anti-racism is not only a call to disavow acts of violence and hate, but to overtly end the exploitation, policing, and premature death of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We know justice is a protracted struggle, but so are acts of collectivism, healing, and care. Sustaining justice also means sustaining community and sustaining the self, which is ultimately a challenge to the racial capitalist structures that attempt to diminish our affinities and self-worth. So thank you. I just wanted to read that statement to kind of tie us all together and tie off all of the themes and motifs from the poems and the responses. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and that we can actually share space in person once it's safe to do so. Have a wonderful day, and don't forget to visit the Berkeley Public Library to check out all of these amazing books as well as other titles. So thank you, everyone. It's evening now, I think. I don't know. I have no sense of time. Good evening. Good afternoon. Bye.